Hi, I'm Graham Blackburn, and this is Traditional Woodworking by Hand. And in this episode, we're going to be looking at some tools that are not generally regarded as woodworking tools, namely files and rasps. So, machinists have a lot more files and rasps than woodworkers need. But you can see there's a selection here, and I'll tell you what the differences are. But I should point out that as a woodworker, whatever kind of file you're using, it's usually best if you have some kind of handle. Now you can see I've made my own handles for some of these here, but you can also buy handles like this. Here's a handle that goes in, just tighten it up. It makes life a whole lot simpler and a lot easier. Now, the first thing to know about files is that they have parallel lines that are cut into the tool at about 65 degrees. And there's two main kinds. There's a single file cut like this, and that produces really nice smooth cuts. And then there are files that have double cuts. If you look closely, you can see that there's cuts this way and cuts that way. That cuts a little faster, but it's not such a smooth cut. So here's a single cut flat file. It's a little thinner than a regular one. Here's a half round file, and if you look closely here, you can see that this is a little coarser. All of these files, by the way, come in different degrees, from bastard to coarse to fine to very fine. You use whichever one you need depending on how much work you want to take off the workpiece. Here is a really big file, got a nice handle on it. It's a single cut, but you can see the lines are quite far apart, needs to be brushed out and kept clean. Here on the other side, you can see that it's double cut both ways and it's curved. This is especially good if you're working on filed on round surfaces. Um, you can use files for all sorts of things. The flat, of course, is good for a flat surface. The round is good for any kind of round surface. Here's another one for specialized use. This is called a knife file, because if you look closely, you can see that it comes to a really sharp point here. That also is really good. It's especially good for getting into corners. And you can do a flat face and another flat face here, and you don't have the edge of the file to deal with. Something that a file that I use a lot when I am tuning up my saws is just a regular flat file, just a small one. And this is the file that I use to make sure that when I file the teeth, they're all going to be the same height. This is just a flat file in a flat piece of wood. And wood goes against the saw. And what that does is file the tips of all the saws, and I've explained this before in the saw sharpening videos, but the point is that when I use that, apart from the fact that I'm trying to gently crown the saw, because the saw doesn't just go backwards and forwards, my arm goes up and down, which is also why the handle is at an angle. But as soon as I can see a shiny spot on every single tooth, then I know that the teeth are all going to be exactly the same size. You might, if you're really lucky, come across one of these. This is a file holder. So you can see it's a very small file. It goes in here. And this is called a file jointer. Tighten it up. And what's cool about this is that the slot goes over the saw and it does exactly the same thing as the homemade file. So you're unlikely to find one of these anymore, but it's easy to make one of these. Now, as long as we're talking about saws, how do you actually file a saw? Well, volume 2 of my series of paperback woodworking books tells you the difference between rip saws and crosscut saws. But the thing that is worth remembering is that pretty much all Western saws, saws we use in America and Great Britain, they all have teeth that are perfect isosceles triangles, which means that if you want to file a saw, you simply need to find a file that is no bigger than the teeth that you're doing, and that's the file you use. Here's a little file for little tiny teeth. If I had a much bigger saw, then I'd use a much bigger file. So these triangular files are super for filing saws. Now, here's another file. I know most people nowadays use electric drills, but there's a lot of things that you can do by hand using braces and other boring tools, and that use auger bits. And we can go into auger bits, whether they're single twist or double twist, but you'll see an auger bit has a screw that is either coarse or fine that feeds the auger bit into the wood, and then it has two sides here that need to be sharpened, but they need to be sharpened carefully. So this peculiar looking thing is an auger bit file, because if you look very closely, you'll see at one end there is the file that you use. At the other end, there's nothing. That's called a safe edge. Similarly, with the edges of the file, you can see that at this end there are file cutting ridges. At this side, it's safe. That means that when you're filing this, you can use the one with the safe edge so that it doesn't file the part of the auger bit that you don't want to be filed. Now, there are a lot of other ones. Here is a square file. You might imagine from what I've told you so far that there's all kinds of files. Look what this does. This is a perfect tool for filing shapes, right? Just a square file, but here I've made a nice little tenon, a nice little mortise here, and this is the tool that will make that perfectly good. We can get more detailed, really more detailed, and we can use little tiny rifflers, and there are vast collections of these, all of which they're all different shapes and sizes, but the purpose of them is that they are designed for any particular shape. I find them particularly good if I'm trying to clean up moldings and I have an OG molding with a little quirk into it. I need a file that will just get into the corner. So between this couple of sets here, I have a file to do almost anything. One last thing that I want to mention that belongs in every toolbox, especially a carpenter's toolbox, is a riffler. One side is flat and the other side is curved. At one end, it's just a file, pretty coarse, and at the other end, it's more like a rasp. A rasp differs from a file in that instead of having lines that cut, it has little raised teeth. So it really removes a lot of wood fast. If it's flat, you can use the flat side. If it's round, then you can use the file part round here, or you can use the rasp side here. So remember, a file has lines, either single cut or double cut. A rasp has raised teeth. And it all depends on what you're working on, whether you're working on joints, on shapes, on edges of wood, or saws. There is a file for almost everything that you'll ever need. All you have to do is to keep a nice little handy wire brush and make sure that you keep the file clean so that it works. So I hope that helps. If you want to know more, then you should go to my website where you can see pictures of the books that I've written, and you can also find information on, how to contact me and maybe take lessons and do things like that. I teach all over the place, especially in my shop in New York. And lastly, very important, please subscribe. The more people that subscribe, the more successful the channel is. So I really hope that helped, and good filing. Thank you.